to add one more slide, just to give you the idea of the dilemma action. There it is. Okay, so we take a barrel and we put it in the street. But before we put it in the street, we put Milosevic's picture on the barrel. And the sign says, collecting money for Milosevic's retirement, please insert a coin. But also there is a baseball bat next to the barrel, and the sign says, if you don't have money because of Milosevic's economic policies, bang the barrel. So we put the barrel in the street and we walk over to the corner and let it there. And people come and they look at the barrel, they read the sign, somebody puts a coin, somebody reads the other words about the economic policy, and they bang the barrel. And so as they bang the barrel, the noise attracts more people. After half an hour, there are like 100 people around the barrel, and they're like, you know, banging and like laughing. So finally the police shows up, and they come over and they say, okay, whose barrel is this? And people are like, we don't know. Like, we just saw it sitting there, like, and we're like over there, like, you know, playing dumb. And so the police is like thinking, like, what are we going to do? This is like, you know, almost an unrest happening around this barrel. So after brief consultations, they decide to take the barrel with them. And we come out, take our cameras, snap, take some photos, and send it to the media. Police arrest barrel. So this is the headline. So it's a dilemma action. What is a dilemma action? That means whatever they choose, they're going to regret it. So if they leave the barrel in the street, more people are going to show up and, you know, bang the barrel. And more people are going to show up after they hear the noise. If they take the barrel, they look silly. So what this dilemma action does is actually not just that it's funny and humorous, but it also it undermines the trust that the police officers have in the wisdom of their leadership. So they're thinking, like, we joined the police force to arrest criminals, not to arrest barrels. So our commanders that are sending us to do these things are actually misusing us. And that slowly erodes their loyalty. So finally, when the day comes when they have to confront the demonstrators, their willingness to confront the demonstrators is severely eroded. And so this is exactly what happened. So I will come to that moment when their loyalty is completely eroded, but I would like to follow in what Hardy was saying, and to give you like an idea of how the strategy is being developed in the real world. And so how activists learn from their mistakes, how they build on previous attempts that were done by previous generations of activists, and how, in the end, they get to have a strategy, although they're not a hierarchical organization like an army or a corporation that usually are, let's say, organizations that have strategies. And we believe that these are the... So in other words, what we're going to talk about is what is older, strategy or tactics? And Hardy asked that question earlier. And so sometimes, as you all said, people do tactics without strategy. And sometimes they come up with strategy. So let's say how this strategy is being developed. So first, I want to make a disclaimer. It is important to understand where the word strategy is coming from. Word strategy is a military term. And therefore, some people think that in order to have a strategy, which is a military concept, we need to have a strict hierarchical organization in the movement that is going to enforce that strategy. And I'm going to show you that it is not the case. But we have to acknowledge that the strategy originated in the military. And that is very old concepts dating to Sun Tzu and his book, The Art of War, where there is a sort of a hierarchy that Hardy mentioned. There is the grand strategy. This is the strategic plan, the plan that is developed by generals. Within those, there is a number of plans, operational plans or campaign plans. And then within those, there are the tactical plans. So this is a military concept. It was later used by business, by political parties, by many different organizations, NGOs, and it kind of entered every part of the society. So in theory, how is strategy developed? You come to a room, it's a strategy planning session. We sit there, we analyze everything, we do this, we do that, there are certain steps. We come up with a strategic goal, we come up with the tactics that we're going to do, and then from the strategy, we develop all these tactics. So this is the strategic planning session 101. But in reality, what people do is they feel an urge to get involved in political action. So what they do, they're doing one tactic here and one tactic there, and the third tactic, and as if you remember Hardy's slide, Sun Tzu said, tactics without strategy are noise before defeat. But what is interesting is that sometimes there is this tactic and that tactic, and all of a sudden, some tactic, and then the strategy is born. So we see every now and then that movements do develop strategies. Although they didn't start in the strategic room, they started in the street. So there is a disconnect here. In theory, there is no difference between theory and practice, but in practice, there is. So why do we plan to begin with? What is the reason for planning? The idea is that if we foresee things up front before they happen, if we can actually anticipate all the possible developments, we can prepare ourselves, and therefore we're going to spend less time and less effort when these things come and when these things happen. So the idea is, I put it as a first law of movement dynamics, is the less effort we spend in preparation, in forming, then that means more effort we're going to spend catching all the loose ends when things happen. On the other hand, the more time we spend in development, less time we will have to spend, or less effort we will have to spend in catching all these loose ends. So ideally, we will make a movement that we will not have any effort sustaining it. It will run itself. So the leadership of the movement will actually not run the movement. The movement would run itself. And so this sounds like impossible, right? Is it impossible?
In theory, no.
In theory, no, but in practice it is. This is for the second law. So the answer to that, can a movement run itself, is the concept of emergence. And that means simple local rules that lead to complex strategic behavior. So I'll explain that. So it exists everywhere. It's all over the nature. Emergence also explains things like how cities emerge, explains things like how money emerged, explains many different things which exist. They're very complex, but there's not one individual or group that invented it. It just arose. So something similar happens to movement, and I will try to explain. We look at a single ant. There is nothing more aimless. The ant is running around. There is no purpose. You cannot really notice what the ant is doing. But if we look at the ant colony, we see the purpose. There is not a single ant that understands the big picture, but there is a big picture. So it can happen. So this is an ant hill in Kenya, where I live, a picture taken recently, which explains that ants can build these things. And this is the picture of Tahrir Square. So people can make these things without central committee that is giving orders and saying, you do this and you do that. And this is how movements work. But that doesn't mean that there is no strategy, that this is spontaneous. There is a strategy. It's just a little bit different than a strategy of an organization that has a hierarchy. So simple rules, complex behavior. So what are these rules? And to give you these rules like really in a nutshell, I will use a tool that was developed by George Lakey, which is called the spectrum of allies. And the idea of this tool is that when we look at the struggle around an issue, we can pretty much define different groups, social groups, organized groups, informal groups, segments of the society, demographic groups, and we can put them in different categories. First, there is this category, which George Lakey called active opponents. So these are people who are actively opposing our effort. So that means that their interests are incompatible with ours, and they're willing to fight to preserve the status quo. But not all opponents are active. There is also another group called passive opponents. They oppose, but only in theory. In practice, they don't do it with much enthusiasm, or they even don't do anything about it. They mostly just talk or like on Facebook. Then there is another group which are the neutrals. And neutrals are people who don't have any opinion, or they don't care about the issue, and they're just out of the struggle. Then there are passive supporters. These are those people who are liking our Facebook page. They're saying, yeah, good job, but they're not contributing in any other way. They're not actively joining the struggle. And then there are the active allies, and these are people who are with us. So the idea of the spectrum of allies, as George Lakey put it, is that our job is not to convince active opponents that we are right and that they become our active supporters. That's actually unrealistic. The idea is to move active opponents to be passive opponents. To move passive opponents just to be neutral, not to convince them that we are right, just that, they shouldn't actually enthusiastically fight for their side of the conflict. Neutrals turn them into passive supporters, and passive supporters turn them into active supporters. So one step at a time. This means that the tactics that people do in movements are first non-confrontational, and they're aimed at two things: activizing, involving people who are supporting us, and deactivizing or neutralizing those who are opposing us. Also bringing the neutrals to our side. So it's a very, very, limited scope of influence that we're looking at. But it has a cumulative effect, because all these small steps, like every group on this spectrum, makes one small step to the left. But if we look at the whole spectrum, it actually shifts to the left. And this is how we can have like big movements happening, of big shifts in the public opinion. But when you look at every single segment, there are only small shifts happening in each segment. Nobody turned from an opponent to a supporter.
I've never seen it written about, but it makes sense to me that if you shift some passive allies, they're going to bring neutrals with them. Or if you bring some neutrals, they're going to bring passive opponents.
Yes.
And so this exercise, you map out all the groups, but in actual fact, if you shift one group, another group might shift organically anyway.
Exactly, and this is the another thing that is important about this, because movements are broad-based. There is a central initiation, let's say, but a lot of tactical things that are happening are local rules. So people are talking to their neighbors, people are talking to their co-workers, and they are shifting this spectrum. They're shifting these groups to this.
I have problems with identifying your definition of a movement. I don't see a movement without a philosophy.
Okay, let's get to
You
that.
don't see a movement without.
Yes. Let's get to that. There. Uh-huh.
The neutral.
Uh-huh.
I'm thinking of a campaign of Oxfam. We always focus on that because it can go to the right. So
Yes.
these are the swingers. They can go to the right or they can go to the left. So we try to devise a specific strategy on this specific sort of people.
Yes, true. This is something that can go either way. So It's always worth remembering what was said on day one. This is a contest. It's not a formula that will always shift to this side. It's a contest. There is another side. There is another agent in this contest which can shift these neutrals to their side.
Still on this, before going to the philosophy of the movement, I have the feeling, but maybe I'm wrong, that using mass media to achieve this might be counterproductive because you must develop parallel messages, each one aimed at a specific group. And sometimes the message that you convey to your active opponents to make them passive opponents might be even contradictory with the one you develop to make passive allies active allies. So they should not hear one another. So can you use
Excellent point.
media or
Excellent point. This is why this particular dynamic works best with broad-based movements, not with a centralized campaign. If you look at all the writing that was done on political campaigns, it's all about us and them. We are here, our political opponents are there. It's rarely about looking at the wider society and trying to, I mean, we can say recently there have been attempts to use broad-based grassroots marketing in political campaigns. But traditionally, that is not the case because the targeted message that they do through media is different from what movement is doing. What movement is doing is not centrally disseminating the message. It relies on everybody who is part of the movement to disseminate messages on their own. So you talk to your co-workers, you talk to your friends, you talk to your family. You don't, how shall I say, wait for some political leader or candidate to come out and give direct.
So this is achieved through direct contact.
Exactly, and this is and this is where I want to go into the next slide.
Comment on that media thing. So it's who is carrying the message in the media that talks to different people. So you could have a nurse sharing the message, and then that will talk to her constituency. So it's the sources that you as a campaign present to the media. So the people who you use as your spokespeople, and you use multiple different spokespeople. So then that will talk to different people. So it won't shift. It's just if you had one charismatic leader there who half the population didn't like, but all the campaign did like, that, then you've got a problem. So it's all those different people you promote as leaders.
Good point. That moves that whole initiative closer to a movement-like behavior. It's multiple spokespeople. It's decentralized leadership. I'm going to go into that now. Okay, so what is movement strategy after all? So what do movements need to have to encourage these one-on-one discussions, to encourage people to do things in their local communities on their own without waiting for the movement, and therefore to spread the movement further? So the movement has to have a clear goal that everybody agrees on. So when we do things on our own, in our own local communities, we know it is in the service of the larger goal. And this goal needs to be specific, it needs to be measurable, it needs to look achievable, otherwise people wouldn't fight for it if it's unrealistic. It has to be relevant to their everyday lives, their hardship, their grievances, the long-term transformation they want to see in the society. It has to be very relevant to that, otherwise the goal is not serving a higher purpose. And it has to be timely. It has to have a temporal limitation. It's not something that we're gonna do until we ran out of breath. It's something that has an end, and they can see it, because a lot of people will not be able to be full-time, 24-hour a day, 7 days a week activists. They want to see the end of it. Another thing is there has to be an agreement on the method, and that is that we are, all of us that are part of this movement, we're not officially joining an organization, we're part of a movement, which is an effort. We have to agree not just on the goal, but we have to agree on the method. And that method is nonviolent method. And later I will explain why it needs to be nonviolent and what benefits it brings. But nonviolent method is a key for local rules of engagement. Because if we don't have the agreement on the nonviolent method, in other words, if we don't have the nonviolent discipline, things will fall out. And locally, we'll have eruptions of violence that will hurt the... And finally, we need to develop some structure. It's not a rigid structure like in an organization that, you know, you are either a member of it or you're not a member of it. It is a structure as a skeleton, and the movement is built around that structure. So there you can be a part of the movement without officially joining, by accepting the goals and the method and having some relation with the structure. Yes?
Just going back to the goal, what do you mean by achievable? Because
We'll come to that.
okay.
Yes. So let me just spend a few words on the structure. So the structure or the organization of the movement has to be horizontal. It has to rely on horizontal communication. In other words, if we have a vast movement, let's say 100,000 people are part of the movement, how would we make a decision to do this or that? How would we bring all these people together? It will be impossible. But if we have a federalized movement where each chapter has their own autonomy within the larger strategy, accepting the goals and the methods, they can, in their particular situation, find the appropriate course of action. So if they are in Nashville and the issue is the lunch counters, they will do the lunch counters. But they know it serves the larger strategy. They don't need to ask Martin Luther King, oh, what are we going to do? They know what they want to do, but they also know how it's going to serve the larger strategy. So they're not doing things on their own. And then horizontal communication. If one town does something and the other town communicates to that town, they don't need to wait for the leadership of the movement to tell them what to do. They communicate to each other and they say, what these guys did over there, we can do over here. Or we can modify it. So horizontal communication is important.
How do you keep track that everything going in the same going? Because some groups really misuse the representation or speak on your behalf and then...
Yes. And that brings us to the next part of the structure, which is training. Because people need to go through a training process before they enter the movement. This training process achieves two things. And those movements who had a training component, we saw it in the video about Nashville, when Jim Lawson was doing trainings. I was doing trainings every day for a number of months with Otpor. Every day I would accept a number of new recruits and lead them through the training process. And after they finished the training process, they would officially be part of Otpor. So what do these trainings achieve? First one is an agreement of goals and methods. So you put the barrier up front and you say, if you want to join the movement, you have to accept the goal and you have to accept the method. If you don't accept that, maybe this is not a place for you after all.
Or do something else.
Or do something else.
Raise money.
But if you want to be part of this, you have to be on board with this. Because we don't want to have that discussion later. You know, I was thinking that maybe a violence tactic would be more appropriate. No, you agreed that you are not going to use violence when you are part of this effort. So,
say that you must speak from a position of authority and they must accept it. How do they come to accept it?
if they want to join the movement.
Yeah, but why should you be the one who decides that they join the movement? I'm just playing the devil's advocate here.
Well, I mean, the thing is that if you want to join the movement, you need to accept certain behavior of that movement. It makes total sense. Yes.
So we've talked about here sort of indirectly finding achievable objectives that may seem small relative to the whole vision, the integration of lunch counters, the boycotting of salt, the boycotting of white businesses. But when through nonviolent power people actually succeed at something in a society where people would normally say reform is impossible, and people achieve even a small reformist goal, it becomes incredibly attractive for people to say, we want what those guys did because they actually did something.
That's another thing. You know, the thing is that like why people decide to join the movement. Right. Why do they come and say, I want to be part of this? And then you ask them, if you want to be part of this, you have to accept this. But why they say, I want to be part of this, is you build a winning record. You build a winning record and they want to join. But the entry point is not, we take anything that comes. There is a process when they internalize and accept the movement culture so that we can all act in the same way. We are not just like a group of people that has the same banner, but we have the unity. And I'll come back to that later. But
Could I add something in response to Ahmed's question? Because a lot has to do with how decisions are made in the movement. In SNCC, for example, we decided everything based on consensus. What that meant is we would talk and talk and talk until there was no more disagreement. And our meetings would last for 3 days and 2 nights. And part of that meant that sometimes the decision was made by the people who were still awake.
exactly.
But
And great point.
In the Palestinian 1987 Intifada, there were leaflets that appeared every 2 weeks with suggestions that on Tuesday we will hoist flags, on Thursday we will visit relatives. And the popular committees in the local villages were free to disagree and have another priority, but there were suggestions. I just want to raise the question of
this
how
is a great
decisions are
this is
made.
a great point, because in a horizontal movement you don't have the position of authority, and somebody says, why should I do that? You say, because I say so and I am the no, you don't, because it's horizontal. So you have to have reasons for that. So you have to have the whole story. Why do we need to use nonviolent method? Because we want to achieve this. And why did we pick this goal? Because this is the reasoning behind it. It's not, there is no authority that is based on a title or a position that you say, you have to do it like this because I said so. It doesn't exist. So reasoning has to be there. And as Mary said, sometimes you will spend like days trying to how shall I say, come to a decision because of that.
Way around as well, because probably the objective you have part of your movement established, so probably when you have the other allies coming to you and speaking to you, probably they would have much better ideas or some problems identified that could be generated better. So that's how it's going to change.
Exactly. And what is good about that is that as long as it serves the greater goal, they can do whatever they want. This is the beauty of it. And people are going to have much better ideas than the leadership of the movement. But they just cannot operate without any structure. That structure doesn't need to be rigid, as in a formal organization, but a structure needs to exist.
But excuse me, then I think that's it's a significant point, a learning point for this session, because the leadership issue, you can see it's generating a lot of interest and controversy. It should have been inserted deliberately as a separate component of this training to understand power, relationship, and power within movements and within the strategy and tactics of that.
Unfortunately, it's a great topic, and unfortunately we don't have time for that. And I have my ideas on that. I'm against leadership. I'm for the core. I'm the advocate of the core, and this is the group of people. It doesn't matter where they are in the hierarchy, but they are committed to the same values, and they work together. Exactly, like the Freemasons. Okay. Let's spend few minutes on the objectives, and I'm going to use the example of the Salt March that Hardy talked about. So I don't need to give you an introduction into the whole thing. He did it brilliantly, and I'm just going to go straight in medias res. So let's look at the goal of the Salt March, and using the SMART criteria that were formulated by Doran in the Management Review 1981, I think. So, SMART criteria: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely. And we're going to look at the letter that Ghandi sent to Viceroy Lord Irwin on March 2nd, 1930. And he says, on the 11th day of this month, I shall proceed with such co-workers of the ashram as I can take, to disregard the provisions of the salt laws. I regard this tax to be the most iniquitous of all from the poor man's standpoint, as the independence movement is essentially for the poorest in the land. The beginning will be made with this evil. So let's look at this letter where he actually tells his opponent, this is what I'm going to do, this is my objective, this is my goal, of the Salt March, and let's try to see if this meets the SMART criteria. Where can we see that this goal of the Salt March is specific? Any ideas? Yes, he's going to disregard the provisions of the salt laws. So he's going to disregard the provisions. So it's very specific what he's going to do. He's going to break the law. How is it measurable? When he goes to the beach and takes the sand, anyone can measure it. How is it achievable? Why does it look achievable? Any ideas? It doesn't seem to be difficult. Yes, he doesn't say millions of Indians will break the law. He doesn't say that. He says, I shall proceed with such co-workers of the ashram as I can take. Which means maybe I'll be alone. Maybe nobody will come with me. Maybe I'll bring like 10 people. You know, it's very realistic. It's achievable. You know, he doesn't say, millions of people will rise and, you know, whatever. He's giving an achievable goal.
And I'll add one thing here. I mean, during that time, they went from Ahmedabad of India to Gujarat and then to the coast here. And they walked for 240 miles.
Yes.
And finally, 60,000 people
Yes.
were with Ghandi.
Yes.
And he went alone and finally 60,000.
Yes.
No, he started with 79.
He started with
Who had
79.
been trained intensively
Exactly.
for months.
Exactly. But this is why it looked realistic, because he didn't say 60,000 people were going to show up. He said, I'll show up, maybe somebody will come with me, and we'll see who comes. And this looks realistic, and people are like, well, maybe, you know, it will work. Why is it relevant? Why is this relevant to the larger struggle? Does it say here? Exactly. He says, as the independence movement is essentially for the poorest in the land, the beginning will be made with this evil. So he connects one evil, the salt tax, with the independence movement and with the status of the poor. So it's very relevant both for the big idea of the independence and for the poor people. And timely, well, he says on the 11th day of this month. So he really said when he's going to do it. So we can have really smart objectives. We can have objectives that are... let me give you an example from my country. So we had the problem of electoral fraud. So Milosevic was stealing elections, and this was how he would stay in power. So we needed to have an objective that will counter that. And so it was very specific, counter electoral fraud. We need to not just demonstrate that it happened, we have to make people angry and willing to do something about it. And we also need to have the government step back and say, sorry, we shouldn't have done that. So countering electoral fraud was the specific objective of the, how shall I say, the end game of Milosevic's fall. So how was it measurable? So we said we have to bring 1 million people to Belgrade. And there was a significant effort organizing convoys, organizing people to come to show, Serbia is a country of 7 million people, and the population of Belgrade is 1.8 million. So when you have 1 million people in Belgrade, that's pretty much the historical record, you know. And so we need to show that like 1 million people are willing to say no to the electoral fraud. So bringing these people was the way to, how should I say, achieve it and to measure it. Achievable, there was a 10-day build-up where the whole country was put on a standstill. There was the general strike that was declared. All the roads were blocked. All the people were already involved in the acts of civil disobedience. So 1 million people active, they were already there. It wasn't that we said out of thin air, we're going to have 1 million people in Belgrade. They were already protesting. They were already involved in civil disobedience. We just needed to bring them to one spot. Why was it relevant? Because it was Milosevic's source of power. He claimed that he won elections. If we expose the fraud, and if we show that people are willing to stand up and fight for their right, his source of power is going to be severely questioned. And timely, we need to do it before the runoff elections that he had scheduled. And had we waited for the runoff elections, we would be caught up in a different dynamic. Like, do we boycott these elections? What do we do? So it was important to do it. So another example of the SMART criteria. So let me go back to the first law. So the more effort you spend thinking beforehand about these basic rules of engagement, about the method, about the goals, about the structure that is needed to support the effort in terms of horizontal communication, local decision making, local autonomy, mass trainings, providing people not just with the common idea about the goals and the method, but also about providing them with skills they will need to conduct tactics. The more you spend beforehand, the less headache you will have when the movement is running. And especially because of the second law, which says, you know, something will always go wrong. So even if when you spend all that effort and, you know, you prepare yourself and you're doing all this, you know, there will be things that nobody anticipated. So you will always have to go back and say, oops, we need to adjust our plans. So let me just spend a few minutes. I posted the article. This was an article written by Hardy on Open Democracy. I posted it on e-class, and I encourage you to read it. So I just want to use the trifecta of civil resistance that he mentions in that article to explain once again the movement strategy. So the trifecta is unity, planning, and nonviolent discipline. So unity, as we said, unity here is that unity of goal that we talked about. We all agree on the same goal. The unity of method, we all agree it's going to be a nonviolent method. And the unity of this structure that is providing us with horizontal communication, training, and local decision making. So it has to be part of the same effort, united effort. But also, unity means diversity of different people, different parts of the society, representatives of different groups. And also, unity means, in the end, participation of the whole population or significant parts of that population. So this, in the end, using George Lakey's spectrum of allies, unity is actually created by bringing neutrals and passive allies closer to us, activizing them. So we are working together as part of the movement. Second element, planning. I'm just going to quote Dwight Eisenhower. Planning is everything, plan is nothing. So when we talk about movement strategy, we're not talking about a group of people who sits in a room, they spend like a month, they analyze everything, they come up with a piece of paper and say, okay, this is the movement plan, from now on you just stick to this and everything will work out. No, plan is nothing. It's all about planning. That means that every level of the movement, from the national level down to the local level, they have to have the planning capability, which means they have to understand their environment. They need to understand how to formulate the goals that are relevant to their local environment and what are the courses of actions that they need to take. So planning, not a plan, that is what the movement needs. Planning on all levels. And finally, nonviolent discipline. Why do we need nonviolent discipline? Now we're talking about this part of the spectrum of allies, passive opponents and active opponents. We need to pull them out, not to push them, not to increase their cohesion. So no confrontational language or confrontational actions that will increase the cohesion of the opponent. We need to look at the opponent as an onion. We peel the onion. You don't get to the heart of the onion by pushing your finger in. You have to peel it layer by layer to get to the center of it. So pull, don't push. A violent action is seen as a threat. So people try to stick to one another and they stick to their leadership. Not because they like their leadership, but because they're under threat. And nonviolent action creates this pull effect. So people are drawn away from the leadership, and finally leadership is left alone.
We'll have a session on that
process
with active allies tomorrow,
exactly.
Focusing just on that.
Exactly.
Yes. Do you find that sometimes, or did you guys find in your movement, that incorporating former adversaries challenged the unity of the movement?
Yes.
Well, it really depends on how you engage them, and it really depends how you define the goal and the method. And if you find the goal and the method as building a new country where there will be room for members of the regime as well, it's easier. And it has its, how should I say, problems in terms of morality and ethics and what are all the bad guys that will, so it's not like an ideal solution, but it actually helps overcome some of these things. But let me tell you, in reality, most of the people who belong to the regime wait till the very, very end to switch sides. So you don't have a lot of these problems in the early stage. But let me just finish with this, and we're going to have a. So when we talk about these local rules of engagement, so every part of the movement, every member of the movement, every activist of the movement has to understand that when they go out into the street, when they go to their office, to their school, when they meet with their neighbors, whatever they do, they, in their mind, accept the logic of the trifecta of civil resistance. So whatever they do, they're going to promote unity and cohesion. They're not going to be divisive, and they're not going to be confrontational with other elements of the society that are fighting against the regime. They're trying to find a common ground in everyday communication. This is what the movement is doing on the top level, but this is also what activists are doing on the everyday level. Planning, that means that they are going to, in their local environment, use planning as a technique to reach decisions. They're not going to reach decisions out of thin air. And finally, they're going to incorporate nonviolent discipline in their everyday behavior. So when they're arrested, as I was arrested many times, and so whenever I'm arrested, the first thing I would say to the police, I would say, good afternoon, I appreciate what you're doing. I know this was not your decision and that you're misused by the government to arrest political, let's say, opponents, not criminals. I just want to let you know that I don't have any grudge, and I just understand that you were put in this position against your will, and you would be rather doing something else. And so every Otpor activist was doing the same. So we would be like, good afternoon, sir. We totally accept what you're doing. We're like, appreciate it. So what happened as a result of that, the percentage of beatings and tortures plummeted to like less than 1% of those who were arrested. Because the police just felt like bad beating these kids who were like very nice. And like after some time they would give us coffee. It's like they arrest us and they're like, okay, would you like some coffee? So this is the local, this is not like something centrally, this is not a central message. This is the message every one of us is doing. And we had the one where it was here. Yeah, you had it. Yes, you first.
Start, yeah. Since you mentioned that what we did in Tunisia is giving flowers to the state, I mean in police.
We didn't have time for this.
It's okay.
But what I miss in the unity part is vision, because you mentioned goals, and I don't know what the other thing you mentioned, but if in the African context you can't just convince a movement by saying I have goals, but if you are a leader of a vision, then people will listen to you. So
yes,
vision is very
exactly. So let's go back to what Hardy said. Goals are derived from that vision.
Yeah, but
vision is
yes,
but
yes. Has not been mentioned.
Yeah. Well, I couldn't mention everything, but it still stands, and you have a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. Because it's the broader.
Yeah. You have a good point there. So when we talk about goals in general, goals are a result of two things. First is the vision, and the second is the analysis of the current situation. So the analysis of the current situation is the reality that we have to deal with, and the vision is the dream that we want to achieve. So you can't have goals that are only based in reality of the analysis. They have to relate to your dreams, which is the vision. But you also can't have goals that are completely derived out of the dreams, out of the vision, without understanding reality. So what we usually say is that the strategy is a process of bringing together introspection, our dreams, our vision, our values, and the analysis, the outer world. How does this fit into reality? Let's have this one, and we have to close. It's time for break.
Ivan will
if
be
I talk
relevant.
about the achievements, like whether it is achievable or not. Like if I can give you an example, like in my country there was a long march of 1,300 miles from my city to the capital city for the missing person, for the safe recovery of the missing person. They haven't achieved their goal, ultimate goal, but it was like some sort of internationalized. The issue was internationalized. United Nations was involved in it. They got the unity, but there was one element of fear also, like the family members who were joining the long march and the people who were disappeared from their family, they were throwing their dead bodies to different areas of my in my province. So certainly, like if time comes, like after 1 week, 2 weeks, people are getting some sort of fear also. We don't go in that march, otherwise we'll be, or we have seen when it was in the region, the capital city of Islamabad, people were covering their faces. Even like, for example, I was there, I was covering my faces as I'm a human rights activist, but still I was not showing everybody that who I am. So sometimes the state can be very much harsh also in this type of scenario.
Let me bring back the example of the barrel. Why did we leave the barrel in the street? Why didn't we stand to the barrel and say anything? Because we were afraid. We were afraid that if we are caught next to the barrel, we'll be in trouble. So it is important that the movement builds slowly and that it doesn't lead to a, how shall I say, confrontation that will get out of hand. If the confrontation happens early, it can actually spiral out on its own and lead to a disaster. But what is also important is with failures, what Mary said yesterday, we have to prepare for the failure. Because we have to fight another day. So when we fail, we need to have a mechanism. How are we going to re-emerge again? Maybe not the same people, but the same effort. So this is also part of the strategy, like creating this kind of contingency plan. Like what happens if it is a failure?
In terms of what inspires people, sometimes people think, well, if I do the bravest possible act, it will inspire others because of my bravery. I'm going to publicly step out and say something, but then possibly be subject to very severe repression. So that's one theory of what would inspire people. Another theory of what would inspire people, though, is simply showing something is possible and you can live to do it, not suffer consequences and go on another day. And sometimes it's the low-risk kind of decentralized tactics, the putting the barrel there and leaving and saying, okay, see, we can get away with it, that inspires more participation, because courage is one thing, but the ability to say, we can do this and it's actually not a huge personal risk to us and still push the cause can actually sometimes be more inspiring to people.
Very good point. Very good point. Yes, very good point. And this is why I'm coming back to the local rules and local autonomy. People will know better what is appropriate in their town, in their village, how far they can go. And the more autonomy they have, but understanding of the clear goal and the method, and having the skills they need to create a tactic, is everything that you need to give them. There is no need for any courage or any martyrdom on the national level. There is no need for that. They will do it on their own. So I don't want to hold you any longer. We're going to do this. But I'm going to be here all week.
I have a quick suggestion. I feel really frustrated that we couldn't elaborate more on the part about power plays between activists and how you do horizontal hierarchy and get everyone in
We can have a lunch discussion tomorrow about that, whoever is interested.
Maybe there's more demand for some specific session about this, and it will be richer if everyone participates. Because my personal experience is that is a spectacular failure of a movement because of that specific reason. So I have like millions of questions to ask. I don't want to make it a back and forth.
Okay.
If more people are interested, maybe we can plan.
Okay. Let's plan for tomorrow. If it's like a bigger group, we can find a room. If there is a smaller group, we can do it over lunch.
But the only thing on lunch is the award ceremony.
And the day after tomorrow. Yeah. I mean, when I say tomorrow, children like that are young. When they say yesterday it was everything before today, and tomorrow is everything in the future. So like it doesn't know.
Actually, while we're all here looking at the schedule, there are only 3 places it can go: dinner tonight, dinner Thursday night, or Thursday night, which is a free evening. Perhaps dinner tonight would make more sense.
Yeah.
Dinner tonight.
Dinner tonight.
Okay.